Call please.
President Bucher,
Here.
trustee Hopkins,
Here.
trustee Gant,
Here.
trustee Faber,
Here.
trustee Brooks. Here. Trustee Foley
Here.
and trustee Barheim.
Here.
Thank you, President.
Okay. Number 4, presentation overview of the village's first capital plan. A, part 2, facilities and infrastructure.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This will be a 3-part presentation. Actually, it's 2-part presentation. I'm Sandra Miller, Village Administrator, and with me today I have Dave Brettel from Public Administration Associates. Dave is here because he was part of your community for a short time as an interim administrator, and I thought for some historical context that we get into have here in case of questions. But also he has some good experience in capital planning, so I'd like to have him give some wisdom from his experience in capital planning as part of today's presentation.
Thanks for the invite, and I'm happy to be here. And just, I know almost many of you, but there's some new faces too. So as Cassandra mentioned, I was the interim administrator here for a short period of time in 2023. And we're talking about this, and I think it's a very important topic. And I thought I'd come here today and see the old friends and contribute what I could. And if you don't like my message, it's free. So you can't beat the price. But I've seen it.
And then we also have Todd Taves here from Ellers, and he will give the concluding part of the presentation today about how to fund capital projects in the future, depending on what the board's decisions are. So without further ado, we are going to go through a history lesson. So as part of the presentation today, we're going to go back to the beginning, back to when the village of Silver Lake and the town of Salem merged. We're going to talk about the how, the why, and the budget. And then we're going to go from that point to where we are today. So, history of the merger. As you all know, in February of 2017, the village of Silver Lake and the town of Salem merged into the single municipality, as we all know today, is the village of Salem Lakes. They did this through a cooperative plan and by holding town halls and a public hearing. And it was all allowed by state statute. It was section 66.037, 0307 of the Wisconsin Code. And the state actually approved the plan that was put together by a citizens committee, talked about town halls and a public hearing. They approved it on December 5th of 2016. So who participated in the merger? There were a number of individuals that participated. There were 5 people as part of the Corporation Study Committee. There was the board of Silver Lake, the board of the town of Salem. There was also 2 public information sessions, and there was a public hearing. The Citizens Committee talked about the why. Why should you merge? What is the benefit? And they looked at it from both a village perspective, but primarily from a town perspective. So the Citizens Committee found that there were a number of advantages of being incorporated for the town of Salem. One of them was to establish boundaries. They wanted to protect Salem's borders. As many of us know, Salem was being annexed slowly by the village of Paddock Lake. And there was the goal of creating one unified community to try to stop annexations and to keep the character of the town of Salem and the village of Silver Lake. They also wanted to assure orderly development and help to shorten the time for zoning approvals and make it easier. They wanted to increase government efficiency and take full advantage of home rule. So cities and villages can actually, this is from their FAQ, they can kind of do anything they want, not entirely. But the towns can only really do what is permitted by the state. So by the town merging into a village, it gave them more home rule authority, more statutory authority. So they did so through a cooperative plan or a boundary agreement. The boundary agreement with the village of Silver Lake was cited by the Citizens Committee as the most streamlined of all possible ways that Salem could actually incorporate as a village. They saw it as being more cooperative. They saw it as a way to keep the town and the village of Silver Lake together as one. It didn't require a referendum. It would take less time. It's pretty quick and efficient, and it was also the cheapest route. From a number of documents, which are referenced here on the bottom, it was kind of nice. We're going to give you a little history lesson here too. I was able to find the original documents from the town meetings and the FAQ from the village of Silver Lake and the town of Salem online. So a lot of the information I'm presenting today is pulled directly from there. None of this is coming out of my mind. This was all directly quoted from the FAQ in the public information meeting. So the question I asked, did the services change? When the town and the village merged, was there a reduction in services, or did the services remain the same, or did they increase? What we found from the FAQ in 2016 was the town already provided fire and rescue services to Silver Lake, so there would be no changes to those services. The village of Silver Lake already had a contract for police with Kenosha County Sheriff's Department, so there would be no changes there. There were actually some changes, so they had their own police department, and they also had water patrol. But they were able to merge and use a contract with Kenosha County. They do not anticipate any substantive changes to the bill rate, and the current services would remain the same at the time the agreement goes into effect. This was a copy paste right from that FAQ document. Same with the next two things. From the public information meeting in 2016, the current village and town employees will remain in their current jobs for at least 1 year. Also, current services of law enforcement, fire and rescue, and public works would remain the same. Further, this information came directly from the Department of Administration approval of the cooperative plan, which happened in 2016. It talked about zoning, law enforcement, fire and rescue, public works, and administrator and staff positions. And in short, all of this says that everything was going to remain largely the same. They had to continue providing all those services. They had to continue employing those staff. They had to continue providing public works, fire, etc. Additionally, from the public presentations, from the public forums, these were copy and paste as well. You can see very succinctly that the majority of things did not change. The only things that changed a little bit were the items that are in that bluish color. So highway would be responsible for street signs. Fire and rescue, they had to create a fire commission. For zoning, Silver Lake already had a process in place. And when it became Salem Lakes, they would continue to contract for services with the county of Kenosha. Further from the public information meetings, no changes to the library. There was already public safety in place with the sheriff. There was no changes to municipal court. There were changes to the board. So you used to have 2 boards, one for the town of Salem, one for the village of Silver Lake. Now you only needed 1. And now there were no changes to parks and no changes to garbage. So the services were largely remaining the same. So were savings realized? That was the next question that I went through is, did we see any savings by incorporation? Savings in incorporation appear to be minimal, if at all. There was a decrease of board from 2 boards to 1, but all previous services were maintained except water patrol and village public safety staff. But the cost of public safety didn't go away. It was just replaced with a contract with Kenosha County. All previous infrastructure was maintained. All the staff was maintained. Planning and zoning was contracted through Kenosha County. And no statutory responsibilities actually increase when you become a village versus when you are a town. So then what happened between 2017 and 2025 was the next question I had in my mind. Well, capital expenses did not decrease with the merger because you still maintain all of the facilities, including you used to have 2 wastewater treatment plants. You did decommission one between 2019 and 2020, but you still use it as a lift station. So the property didn't go away, the maintenance of infrastructure didn't go away, you still use it. The regulatory landscape between 2017 and 2025 has actually changed. It's become more expensive. The regulations continue to increase. We've added capital expenses such as lift stations. We've assumed responsibility and costs of a cemetery. We've increased public activities such as music in the parks, which are paid for by the village. We've also added parks infrastructure, pavilions, and playgrounds, which all require maintenance. Total staffing numbers, however, have remained similar or even maybe decreased slightly. But wage pressure has increased due to inflation and the surrounding market, and that's unavoidable. Population has also increased slightly. And then we have this thing called levy limits. Let's talk about levy limits. What are they? So levy limits and net new construction. In 2005, the legislature actually passed a law that implemented levy limits And under the state law, a municipality is allowed to increase its levy only by net new construction. That's it, not by inflation. So what does net new construction look like in our community? What's the next question my mind went to logically? Net new construction on average in our community is 1.36% from 2018 to 2024. But what is inflation? Inflation has been almost 30% when you look at year-over-year increases. So when you're seeing a net new construction total of 9.53, but inflation is almost 30%, it's really hard to keep up. So now let's talk about the budgets of Silver Lake and Salem. When Silver Lake and Salem were still their own individual entities in 2017, prior to the merger, this is what their budgets looked like. Silver Lake had a budget of $2.1 million. The town of Salem had a budget of $16.7 million. If you hypothetically combined those, that would have given you an $18.9 million budget. What do you think they did when they merged? Pause for a moment. Think they merged at the hypothetical? They didn't. When they merged at a $15 million budget, which was less than the original town of Salem budget by $3 million. I've been trying to wrestle with this because when I built the capital plan with staff over the last year, I've been trying to answer the question, why? Why can't we fund ourselves? Where did the problem arise? What happened? So we recreated history to try to understand it. And this is what we found. So let's look at actual versus hypothetical. If you had started at a $15 or at an $18 million budget, and you had taken all of the same incremental increases that you've taken in your actual budget to get to where we are today, you would be at a $25 million budget. Still doesn't meet inflation, but that's where you would be. This is where we are. These numbers are important for later. So it's also important to mention, at the time of the merger, future financial forecasting did not include a capital plan to project costs to ensure that the correct starting budget was adopted. You can only make the decisions that you have the information in front of you to make, right? If you don't know what you don't know, it's really hard to know where you should start. You didn't have a capital plan. So I don't really want to fault anybody for where we started and where we are today. What we need to accept though is where we are today and how do we move forward. So this is where we are today, $42 million. And when we present the capital plan in a couple minutes, you'll get to see where maybe we need to be. And then it's going to be up to you as board, as well as the public, to figure out how do we move from where we are today, where maybe we should be, to not fall behind. Before we do that though, I'd like to talk about tax breakdown. So for the public and anyone else that is interested or curious how your tax dollars are spent, here is just an example based on Salem Lakes Library, Kenosha County, Salem Grade School, Westosha Central, and Gateway Technical College. The village of Salem Lakes, out of the entire pie, gets 18% of the tax levy. What does that look like in dollars? On a $250,000 house, your average tax bill is about $4,000. Salem Lakes gets $741 of that $4,000. So that's the piece of the pie that we realize here, to pay for all of this, all of the different services that you enjoy, such as public safety, fire protection, plowing your roads, paving your roads, everything. This covers everything. $741 on $250,000 home. That's what comes here. I also want to just take a moment to look at municipalities with similar populations. Now, I'm not suggesting we need to grow to these numbers, but what I want to show you is where we are in comparison to communities of similar size. Salem Lakes has 14,000 residents. And I compared communities down to 11,000 up to 16,000. There's lots of other communities I could have put on here. But I tried to also pull in size of their sewer system, number of square miles. So how can I find things that are more similar in size to us? And these are the ones that were as comparable as I could get. One thing you'll notice, we always hear comments about how we're overstaffed or our budgets are too big. We have 42 staff total full-time here. We are the smallest municipality by a lot out of the ones that you see here, as well as in budget. But we're the largest.
Does that count police and everybody?
I will have to-
Burlington has their own.
I will have to get you those numbers. So if we added police, you could add 6. Approximately. So you could add to this a little bit with some of our contracted services, but our full-time staff, on staff here is 42. You could add, I would say, if you wanted to add all of our contracted staff in here, you could add 10. So that still only takes you to 52. And we are the largest in square mileage, 33 square miles. So now I don't want to really talk about that anymore. Now I want to get back to capital planning. So what has happened between 2023 and 2025? And I'm going to invite Dave up to talk about what he saw in 2023 with the budget.
Sure. So I think two different things going on here. One is, where you're at, do you have enough money, right? And most municipalities don't, so you're not unique there. Then the second question is, should you have a capital plan? And I look at those as two, related, but two separate things, right? Even if you don't have any money, even if you have $1 and you got $10 million worth of needs, still really should have a capital improvement plan, a CIP plan. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. And I'm a big proponent of it. I lived through it, and that maybe is my next point, that this is all an evolutionary process, that there's nobody to blame. There's not a culprit here. I mean, you do a unique merger and I don't know that anybody could have had a crystal ball and figured out all the ramifications to that. What Cassandra's saying makes intuitive sense to me, and kind of what I was feeling when I was here. I never had crunched the numbers as far as where you started. But there's also, so that's one piece that you start with enough money. And the second is also about expectations, right? So you've got these other communities that are on there with Grafton as a community we'll be working with, and they've got a different set of programs, right? So a lot of that is what you're comfortable having with programs. If you had a small village and a big town, right? You put them together and called it a village when you were done, but a lot of the services are town-like services, and that's okay. It's what your community wants, right? If you're okay without having a full-fledged Little League program going on in a swimming pool and stuff like that, that's what you're here to decide, and your residents what services you want. So that. But the idea of, whether you started, with the appropriate amount in a merged budget, and that's water over the dam, so it is what it is. But secondly, I think in my mind, the biggest slide that I saw is net new construction versus CIP. And it was always a mismatch, right? Because you can only raise your budget, the levy, by net new construction. But when, you're seeing figures of 1.6% or 1.3%, that's not, you shouldn't feel bad. That's what most of the state of Wisconsin is. It might be a little bit under that average, but that's the room for you to grow your budget. And that's been very small, and it is for all municipalities, right? So you got that, you got, what the expectations are in terms of services, and then, that's the net new construction problem. So when I kind of dropped in here, and what I think I would just emphasize at this particular point is just that it's an evolutionary process, right? The whole budgeting thing. So I would say, and I don't mean to step on toes or anything, when you had more of a checkbook than you did a budget at that time, right? So you paid your expenses and you stayed solvent, and that's all good, and you were in business, but it was mainly just writing out checks to cover expenses. And so, I don't know if you recall, I was kind of being a blockhead about it, but it was very important to me that a budget amendment process be in effect, right? So if you've spent too much on potholes in the road, or you need more money because there's more potholes, it might mean that you have to cut back on hours of something else, but you have to have the money in order to encumber. So that was the one thing that I'll say that we had worked through, and I think had done a nice job with that. And the second thing was to try to put a budget narrative together. And so you had gotten a spreadsheet in the past of just the numbers, right? And it was very not understandable. It wasn't user friendly at all. So in my meager way, I added some narrative to it. This is what we're proposing that you do, and kind of set up a little process that way. And I think that was successful. I remember talking to Trustee Barheit about that, where it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. And it made it easier for you as elected leaders to follow and track that budget. So we've got, the makings, I think, of a more rigorous budget process, but we didn't have a capital plan at that point, and that's kind of the next step in the process, and really how organizations develop. When I was with my county, happened to be in about 2003, maybe we did this, but it was the same steps, right? It was, you get a budget process in place, and then you get a handle on capital improvement. So I'll join in with some remarks about CIP and my feelings of it later, but I think when I left here, you started a new budget year, and Sandra was up.
So you started with, when I came on board, I inherited a 14-page line item budget. And that's what Dave was able to put together and board approved in November of 2023. I came on board in December of 2023. In 2024, what we did then was we basically went back to zero-based budgeting. We blew up the budget. We started back at zero. We said, how do we take this budget from 14 pages with most things categorized in this central services fund, which is great, made it really easy to spend money, but it was really hard to track. It was really hard for transparency. Central services funds, still, you were able to get things paid, you were able to get projects done, but it didn't accurately quantify how much each and every one of your departments or lines of business cost to run. So we put that in categories. We took the entire budget back to zero and rebuilt it. How much does it cost us to run your fire department? How much does it cost to run your public works department? How much does it cost to run every single line of business that government does? And that is now called a GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association of America style category budget. That is this. We took your 14-page line item budget, turned it into a category-based budget. Anyone can open this now and understand it. Anyone, and it makes sense. We also put narratives to it. What does each department do? What are some of their goals? How do they operate? Why do they operate? So that was step one. Step two was to begin long-range planning. Begin capital development and budgeting for strategic planning. Remember from last year, we talked about new program requests. New program request in your budget is something you've never done before, but we need to think about how can you do it. So we implemented that process, talking about that. And that new program request was strategic planning in this case. In 2025, we've now developed the village's first 30-year capital plan of all village facilities, infrastructure, and equipment. That was a huge undertaking. And I don't expect all of you to understand 100% of it today. It's taken me a year and a half to get us to this point. It's taken me a year and a half of working with our staff to get them from line items to category-based and transparent to now a fully transparent capital plan of every single piece of equipment you own. And we're going to begin the process for strategic planning. So what is a capital plan? Now I'm bringing that Dave back up. We'll talk about his experience with capital planning.
Sure, thank you. Won't read the slide to you, but it's a plan, right? So it's a forecast with capital, meaning large items, right? So you can define capital in different ways if you want to. The GFOA has standards for it, but it's assets with a long useful life. So Chief's fire truck is going to be capital asset, your roads, the lift stations, the sewer treatment plant. Software can be capital expense as well if it's large enough investment, right? So these are these big items. They're not recurring. That's the good news. So you don't own them forever like you do personnel costs and things like that. But you do need to plan for them. So it assists you in making good decisions. Now I'll say when I was up here doing this presentation probably in about 2004 with a different organization, my county. There was a lot of skepticism about doing this. It was, hey, Brettel, you're trying to, it's the nose under the camel's nose under the tent, right? That was a real concern about the capital program because you got this thing and we had 5 years, right? So you put these items in 5 years and there was this feeling like you're trying to sneak something past us, and that if you have this and then we approve it for planning purposes, you're going to take this and it's an albatross around our neck, and that you're able to pull a fast one. And that is not my experience with the capital plan at all. You can use it that way if you want to. You can have administrators who are Machiavelli and try to do that, or board members or anything. We used it as a fiscal management tool. It was to control spending. And it was critical to our success. So when we were a county heavily in debt, we were behind on our capital plan, and this is probably about 2010, and we've got $23 million worth of debt. And with capital planning, we were able to pay the debt off. We actually had a mortgage burning party in the courthouse square and paid off all of our bonds, and the county has been debt-free since 2018. It was the only county at the time that was debt-free. Today, there's 2 Wisconsin counties that don't have general obligation debt. But the reason why we were able to do that, pure and simple, was the capital plan. We were able to pay cash for our things, and that was appreciated by taxpayers because we didn't have to pay interest on bonds, which would have been millions of dollars of interest over that particular period of time. So I'll tell you, I'm a big proponent of it. I used it as a fiscal management tool because ours was a 5-year time horizon, but it was the department's challenge to make sure that that plan was populated with things that we needed. And so if a new item appeared in the plan that hadn't been cycled through, from year 5 to 4 to 3, it raised red flags. Why now? Why do we need to do this now? There can be some good reasons for that, change of circumstances, there's something, bridge failed or something like that. But it's really important. And even if you don't have enough money, if it seems futile, we'll never have enough money. It's going to take us 100 years to replace our roads. If that's it, so be it. But start today. And when you make that your goal, you'll be surprised that over time, it's like, oh, now we're down to 50 years. Still an absurd timeline, but we're getting closer to the mark because it's a priority for all of us. And then, the other part about capital planning, which I didn't have to deal with, thank God, when I was in my regular full-time job, was the lead time on this stuff. I don't know, Chief, what's a new pumper now? 5 years, 4 years? So
3 years.
That tells you right there. I mean, you have to have this in the queue and in the plan because you can't just work it on the spot. So in our capital plan, and Cassandra will talk about this a little bit, we funded only 1 year. So it was part of the budget, part of that document that she showed. Last part was capital plan. And the only year that the board was obligated to was the upcoming year, the next year. And other than that, it was understood. This is a planning document. We changed it. We took items out. So there was nothing secret about it. In fact, it was very transparent and made everybody understand what was going to happen, or at least what the plan was. So I got a couple of comments yet, but I think take it away.
So why capital planning? Just to summarize, a capital plan is an essential piece to the future financial health of an organization and the continued delivery of services to citizens and businesses. Your capital plan will become a part of your budget. It will be an appendix to it. So now your document that is currently this will be this plus your capital plan. It is also recommended that state and local governments prepare and adopt a comprehensive, fiscally sustainable and multi-year capital plan to ensure the effective management of your capital assets. We have a lot of them. You're not a small organization. I know a lot of times we feel like we're small, but we're really not. We're 33 square miles and almost 15,000 residents. You are not small. A capital plan should also cover a period of 5 to 25 years or more. And a capital plan is also an important component of a community's economic development program and strategic plan. So all of this is rolling into next steps. So what does your capital plan show? Our capital plan covers a period of 30 years. Just a number of things. It's a number I've used in other organizations, so it's the number I picked for yours. The plan is divided into categories. It includes the fire department, highway department, Silver Lake Community Center, Village Hall, information technology, parks, water tower, and paving projects. Wastewater and stormwater utility are both enterprise funds, and they are also covered in a separate capital plan because they're funded through enterprise funds. You guys already saw that. That was covered at your first, part one of the capital plan presentation. Capital plan is a working document. That's really important. Dave mentioned that. I'm going to emphasize that this is a working document. It is subject to change every single year. The capital plan, you will see in a little bit, was built on today's numbers. So we use today's numbers to project out 30 years. So it is not accurate out 30 years. It is just using today's numbers so that you can get an estimated cost in today's dollars of what you cost to maintain over the long haul. And what's really important to note is our capital plan assumes status quo, no growth. It is only maintaining what you own today. Nothing more, nothing less. It is status quo. So let's look backwards in time again. I like looking backwards. History tells you a lot. So between 2018 and 2025, what have we spent on capital? These are all your general fund capital expenses, so street paving and other capital for totals. You have spent anywhere between $843,000 to $2.4 million. 2.4 was your biggest spend, and every year since has been less than that. This year, you're about $1.5 million in your capital investment. So what does that get? Let's talk about that a little bit. We're going to do a refresher. During capital plan part one, you heard about roads and utilities. We're just going to do a quick refresher because part one was not televised. So for the edification of the public, we're going to go back through those really quickly. So investment into village roads. The total mileage of our village roads and streets, we own 86.16 miles of roads in this village. That's how many miles your public works staff maintain. It's how many miles they plow. It's how many miles you have to repave. It's the number of miles that we have, right? That's a lot of miles. The village average road ratings are seen here over the past, and in 2017, you became a village. This is the number of miles we rehabbed in those years. What was most important of this here is you have approximately 46 miles or 53% of your roadway that is currently rated as 6 or lower. Why is that important? Let's look at our PACER rating chart. So when we look at pavement age, it's depreciating. Basically, your life expectancy at a 10 is excellent. Your expectancy at a 2 is poor. And a 6 is about where it starts to fall off. So once you get below a 5, you really need to be looking at how you can schedule those roads for replacement. 6 and above is okay. So when you're seeing that 46 miles or 53% of your roads are currently a 6 or lower, we need a replacement schedule that is faster than what you have. So the average lifespan of a roadway is approximately 20 years. If the average lifespan of a roadway is 20 years, and you have 86 miles, it's a simple math problem. Divide those numbers, and you get 4.3 miles. So 4.3 miles is what you would really need to be replacing annually if you never want to get behind. What would it take for an annual investment to be able to meet the 4.3 miles per year? Well, $2 million will get you 2 miles. $4 million will get you 4 miles, because it's about $1 million a mile. You've been investing about $1.5 million in roads or less, which is getting you around 1.5 miles. But unfortunately, with inflation, you used to get more for the same investment. Now you're getting less for more money because of inflation. So it's also important to note that during years of more expensive road reconstruction, less mileage would actually be rehabbed. So in 26 and 27, when Lake Street and School Street are reconstructed, the amount of mileage we'll be able to achieve for your current $1.5 million of investment will be much less. So talking next, we'll talk about what number should we plug into the budget this year. So this is kind of like a budget workshop today. It's a town meeting, but it's helping us to plan hopefully we'll be able to understand from the board, where are we going? What numbers should we start to look at? How should we move to the future? And then the last point on this is economy of scale. The more mileage you actually rehab in a year, the lower the cost. Because you'll get better construction costs based on quantity. And then it's hard to see, but this just shows you a $2 million investment and a $4 million investment. So these colored roads are what you're getting. And you'll notice there's less color on the $2 million, more color on the $4 million, because you're getting more miles of roadway done. So another refresher on utilities. These are enterprise funds. So we have 91 miles of sanitary sewer gravity fed. And we have 19 miles of sanitary sewer forced main. And then we also have drainage systems as well that we maintain. Not going to go through all of that, but just to quantify how many miles of infrastructure you have a lot. So now let's talk about where's our capital plan. And capital facilities and infrastructure are important legacies that serve current and future generations. How do I open the next document?
Good. Should be over.
So, before we go too far into this, I don't want to go into the numbers yet. I just want to give credit where credit is due. This has been a labor of love. This has taken a lot of effort. I really want to make sure that we say thank you to our staff, because without them, putting this capital plan together for you would not have been possible. So between Justin and Christopher, they have spent an inordinate amount of time over the last several months combing through our expenses, working with each department head and putting all of this information into this capital plan. So just wanted to say thank you. Each department head worked with them extremely well. Every department head worked with their staff to inventory every piece of equipment you have, including mileage on your equipment, hours on your equipment. Not every piece of equipment has mileage, some of it has hours. So, you know, we try to inventory as best as we could, age of equipment and useful life. We were also able to pull some information from other agencies or organizations that helped us to inform how our capital plan should be built. For example, the Wisconsin DOT has a highway maintenance manual. I did hand this out. So this is just industry best practices. How long does a piece of equipment last? We were able to gather some of the same information for the fire department equipment and IT department too, but we didn't have a comprehensive document like I could pull for highway. So you do have this. The replacement schedule we put in here is just not pulled out of our heads. It is based on best practices. It is also important to note, these are estimates, right? So we built this in today's dollars. They are subject to change. They can change. Just because something is slated in this capital plan in a certain year doesn't mean it has to be done in that year. It can shift forward, not really backwards, because time's already passed, right? So you can shift it to forward years. But what's going to be really important is you're going to want to focus on the bottom expenditure line. Every single tab in your facilities capital plan will roll up into a summary tab. Every single tab has a key and everything is categorized. I will show you that. So it's important to note that that expenditure line on the summary tab is the most important one to look at. That's the most important one because it's really important to not have peaks and valleys. Peaks and valleys are really hard to fund. Valley is easy because it's not expensive. That peak is really hard to attain. So as staff, what we did was we took our entire capital plan for everything that we own and we tried to equalize as best as possible that bottom expenditure dollar to eliminate peaks and valleys and make it so it's something you can plan for. It can shift. It is not set in stone. It is based off of best practices and industry standards on how long equipment should last or what the best practice for replacement should be. So I hope that gives you some good context for what we're going to look at next.
One of the things that we would do are planning exercises, and I'm sure you've got that in mind, is to look at the projects each year and inflate the values. usually inflate, right? Nothing ever went down. That's, your road example is a great one because it's not enough anymore just to say, well, we usually levy about $800,000 for roads. Because that has gone up so much, it's stupid how much that costs, and you really. I don't know how you budget enough money necessarily to do your roads in a 20-year, you don't, but I mean, you do them in a 30-year. Good, but updating those figures every year, and then when it's there, it also helps you. Decide priorities, right? When somebody comes in and with a new program with, hiring staff, et cetera, and they say, well, that's great, but we've got to fix our roads too, and you're able to show that. Decide which you want to do.
All right, so we're gonna look at our capital plan now. So along the bottom here, where my mouse is, you'll see there are tabs. Each one of these we will go through. I would like to not get into the granular detail, but rather keep it focused on a higher level. So you can understand how the whole thing rolls up together. So every single tab is categorized by vehicles, equipment, furniture, fixtures, buildings, and improvements. So you'll see on each tab, there's a B, P, F, P, and I. That's what that stands for. On the bottom of every tab, there's this line called expenditures. All of the expenditures from every single tab roll up into this one. And it's built out from 2025 all the way out 30 years. You'll notice on the bottom, I have two different paving schedules. This one assumes a $2 million investment, which is this bottom line, in roadways every single year, approximately $2 million, give or take a little based on the roadways that are programmed. The next tab assumes a $4 million investment. Well, what you're going to notice is that this bottom expenditure line is not $2 million because you have to include all of the rest of your capital too. That's what we haven't been doing a good job of planning for. We've been doing a pretty good job of planning for our roads, even though we haven't been funding enough, but we haven't looked at the organization as a whole. Today, you're looking at the organization as a whole. So fire department, on the left, you'll notice there's the key. Those letters are the ones I just described. Next, you've got in column B is the description of each piece of equipment that you own in that fire department. Every single one of them, and I know it's small, I don't expect you to be able to read it all. Every piece of equipment from the apparatus that you drive to the AEDs that you use in the rescue squads, to generators, portable generators, as well as your buildings, your rooftops, your parking lots at your fire stations, the generators in the buildings, the well pumps and pressure tanks, windows and doors. All of that has to be capitalized. I have to figure out how you're going to budget for all of it. None of it's free. I wish money grew on trees, but it doesn't. And so then we took and we looked out, okay, based on the condition of each piece of equipment, when do we think we should schedule the replacement? How old is it? How many miles does it have? How many hours does it have? What is the age, right? And then what is the cost in today's dollars to replace that piece of equipment? The only three pieces of equipment I want to focus on in this one, just because it's important, would be these three. What do you notice about those three pieces of equipment?
About the same number of hours.
And they're all the same age. You bought 3 pumper trucks in the same year for your fire department. In good capital planning, you wouldn't do that because each one of those is $1.2 million to replace. And they're all the same age. So in building this capital plan, you'll notice we tried to stagger them as much as we can. So one of them is looked at here, one is here, and one is way out in the future. We know that a pumper truck should probably be replaced about every 10 to 15 years. These are due, or even maybe a little past due. That's okay, we rehab one. We can keep working with them, but you do need to start to get those into a capital replacement schedule. And that goes for all of your equipment. And so that's just one example, and I wanted to focus on those because we talked about those in other meetings in the past, so it should resonate a little bit. And like I said, we did that across all 30 years for every single piece of equipment that you own. All of the equipment that you own then rolls up in this bottom line here, which is your expenditures line. Right here. No. Yeah. Anyways, that'll roll up there. And then the next tab we'll look at is highway department. We did the same thing. You've got your key on the left, line A. Then you have B, which is every piece of equipment that you own, every rooftop, every generator, all of the different things that you own to operate the highway department. We quantified mileage, we quantified usage hours, age of equipment, and then we plugged it in. And at the bottom, you've got your expenditures again. And then Silver Lake Community Center. A building we really don't talk about a lot, but it's one that you own. It's one that you do still have to maintain. I don't know who's been in it recently, but the floors are kind of peeling up a little bit in spots. So you're starting to become trip hazards. It is going to need maintenance. So if you know that it needs maintenance, how to schedule for that? And how much do we think it'll cost in today's dollars? All of that is in here. Again, it goes into your expenditures line. Village Hall. You've got copiers, you've got express vote machines, desks, chairs, a roof. Village Hall roof, we've talked about that. Garage doors, you know, HVAC units, HVAC improvements that are gonna be needed at some point. Flooring, windows, all of these things need to be planned for. We also have parking lots for both Village Hall as well as the leased building next door. If you have a new tenant in there, the parking lot's falling apart. I know it was talked about in years past about replacing that parking lot. Somehow it got taken off the capital plan. What happens when you don't pay for something in the year that you budgeted for it? This dollar goes up in future years. So when you budget for something, unless you have really good reason to not replace it, you probably should. Because if you don't, you're just kicking it down the road. And if you don't replace it, it's scheduled, that number becomes bigger. And everything you push down the road continues to add to your future expenditures. That's the reason I love a 30-year plan, not a 5-year plan. A 5-year plan, it's really easy to push it down the road because you don't see the compounding effect. But in a 30-year plan, it's really hard to ignore the compounding effect because it doesn't go away. Because all the way out for 30 years, you still have expenses that are going to have to be paid. Then going across IT, we looked at our security systems, our access control, servers, workstations, replacements, network and wireless equipment, data center updates. Those are pretty standard numbers. Brian does a really great job of planning for those. Parks, this is something that we've not really ever had a full, complete capital plan for parks. Every single park, including the equipment needed to maintain that, is now itemized. So at the top of this capital tab is all the equipment here that we use for our parks and playgrounds. And then every single park that you own that has something on it, not the just plain grass, but the parks that have something on it show up here. The plain grass does not show up here. It's still an expense. You still have to mow it, but it doesn't show up on your capital plan because it's not a piece of equipment you have to replace or maintain. And then your paving projects, that rolls up as well, which we talked about already. And then your water tower. This is an interesting thing I learned about when I came here. We have a water tower. I knew that. You knew that. But did you know you don't collect any revenues for your water tower? That was interesting to me. I didn't know that. And I'm not suggesting you should or shouldn't. I don't have an opinion on this. However, it is important to note that water tower does require maintenance. And in fact, in 2034, it's going to need $480,000 in maintenance. And in 2030, it's going to need $505,000 in maintenance. Why? Well, it will need to be painted probably somewhere around 2030, and painting it's going to cost you around $500,000. And in 2034, you're going to need a new well pump, probably. Some of these things can shift a little bit. If it's not worn out, you may not have to replace it, but you still have to budget for it. You still have to plan for it. And so that's what your capital plan shows. It starts to put things into a spreadsheet to quantify how much does it cost to operate your business, and your business is government. And there's a lot of different lines in your business, such as public works, water, wastewater, and so on and so forth. So. I want to just pause. That's a lot of information. What questions do you have?
Where do you budget debt service at?
It's a crisper question.
Where we like
Well, each year,
operations.
yeah, and so you're, okay, but you're only putting the minimum in, which is that what the plan calls for then, correct? So why would we borrow from the general fund towards debt service? If we're budgeting for it already, why would we ever want to borrow from the general fund for the debt service? So that list I asked you to pull, we saw there were a couple of years where we pulled a few $100,000 out of general fund that went towards debt service, but not every year did we do that. So what are we trying to accomplish and why? Is it just paying less interest overall?
If you have a set payment that's established when the debt was issued,
Right.
and each year you're required to levy enough money, net of like utility debt and TID debt, to make that payment. Does your tax levy all come into the general fund? And then you transfer to the debt service fund the amount needed to pay the debt. So your debt service fund really should not have much, if any, balance in it. It's just an annual payment of what is owed.
So why do some years we show a transfer, others we do not? That's the question.
I don't know the answer to it, not looking at your budget or audit.
Huh?
The balance.
I don't know. I went back, I had Chris go back and look. And there were a couple of years where we borrowed from the general fund. And as an example, in 2019, we borrowed $850,000 from the general fund. Of that, only 250 went to debt service, 600 to other government funds. The following year, we did the same thing again, only this time we went 600,000 to capital improvements, 250 to debt service. The very next year, we borrowed in 2021, $500,000 from the general fund, but nothing went to debt service. So if we're budgeting for debt service up front, why would we take more from the general fund and pay it towards debt service?
Are these transfers?
These are transfers.
Yeah, so they're not borrowing money. I'm guessing, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here without saying that. Is maybe you had some general fund balance you wanted to apply. So in other words, you've accumulated some cash in the general fund. Sounds like some decisions were made to use some of that money to offset a portion of that year's debt payment or to fund from capital. I'm just guessing that's what had happened there.
But why would you do that? And I know I might be getting ahead of myself, but why would you do that when your net change for that year's budget was $210,000 in the hole? Why would you take more money out of your general fund to put yourself in a hole? That's my question.
If there was a decision made that the amount of fund balance on hand was perhaps more than was needed.
I mean, you might have found out the whole after the fact, right? So you started the year by making the transfer from the general fund into debt service, maybe prepaying debt as possible, I suppose, right? But then maybe you ended up with a deficit at the end of the year when you closed the books.
Yeah, because we did that one year and we came in $626,000 short.
What year was that?
That would have been,
Say 20.
it was 23, but that wasn't you. That wasn't you. And in that 23, we borrowed $750,000 from the general fund, 250 to debt service, 500,000 to capital improvements. So again, if we're doing it up front, but we're not spending the capital improvements until usually around the second quarter of that upcoming year, correct? So we still wouldn't want to transfer it.
And wait, one thing we noticed as well is that when you don't spend the money, you transfer it into your reserves, which is actually okay. So every time you decide not to fund something on your capital plan that you now have, it falls into general fund or fund balance, or it can go into reserves, right? So, I can't answer all the questions. Part of the challenge that we've had in recreating your history is that there's not a lot of institutional knowledge left. So, trying to understand exactly what happened and why, we've had to go back and read budgets, we've had to go back and read audit reports, we've had to dig to understand the history.
Yeah. And I get why you might think you're gonna come in positive. So let's allocate more towards debt service potentially. But we don't typically use that money until the second quarter of that coming year. So if we're showing red, then we should cancel that transfer, leave it in the general fund.
That makes sense.
When you've been levying up a debt service, right? In the first place, I mean, I'm assuming you have the right. Debt service.
Your debt service fund should always balance, right? Because your debt payment is know what your expense is. So the revenue side is the variable. So, and I've got a slide in my part that might help illustrate that a little bit, but I'm wondering if the debt schedule indicated that you needed a levy of X, and maybe the village board decided that they would, instead of levying X, they would levy X minus 250,000 because some funds were transferred to debt service to reduce the levy. It wouldn't be that you had extra money in the debt service.
As I recall, that's the reason that it was done, or taking the money in the general fund and offsetting that, as you just said.
Okay, that would make sense.
600,000.
Well, those were also COVID years. So you had additional expenses and additional revenues. There was some, those 3 years you mentioned could have been offset there.
From the CARES Act or ARPA monies perhaps, influxes that you weren't expecting, so.
And we always looked at the fund balance as money that we had gotten from our taxpayers and didn't spend on something, so we had more than 17% in that reserve. Our ordinance says we have to maintain that, we go and higher than that, then I can recall. And we take some of that money and put it into the budget.
Except at the end of the year, the true numbers came in and we're now $600,000 short.
Take you backwards and so we're back to the slide that I talked about a few minutes ago. This- Remember, I told you to remember these numbers for later. Now that you've seen the capital plan, let's talk about these numbers a little bit. So just based on a $2 million road budget and all the other capital, we're just gonna look at 2026. If you funded the 2026 dollars, $1.5 million you already planned for, it's already in your general fund, you already planned for that. 2026 would actually still fall, it's a $2 million road budget, $2.7 million short on what we showed you on your schedule. You would be $2.7 million shy for a $2 million road budget. If you did a $4 million road budget and all the other capital, which is every other line that you need to replace in some sort of a schedule, you'd be $4.7 million short. What do those numbers show you? If we'd started at this dollar amount, you would have been able to pretty much be still a cash basis municipality.
A little history though, Bill can probably opine on this. Part of the selling point of Silver Lake jumping on board was their taxes were gonna go down. So the mill rate reduced, so that reduced money. That's why there's just this big separation here. This is, so that's, I'm not saying it's $3 million. Otherwise, it would have been a tough sell, so.
You're not wrong. Yep, those are the mill rates. So those are what the mill rates are.
Yep, and the mill rate for Silver Lake didn't go down until year 2. It went down in year 1 for Salem, but not for Silver Lake.
But in year one, we were both operating on our own budget.
Correct.
So it wouldn't go down in year one, it wouldn't go down in year two.
And I think the selling point was, well, now we're gonna combine the boards, there should have less money, and we did, because when, after the first year, the town parks now is in, we got eliminated by the Silver Lake Parks took over.
So I don't really want to dwell a whole lot on the past. But for me, I needed to understand. I needed to understand, how did we get from a merger to where we are today? What was the budget? And why didn't we have enough money? When we built this capital plan, I just was really having a hard time understanding, how could we not fund ourselves? How did we get so far behind? And I ask you a question? Yeah. After you finish with that. And this is where some of our research led us, was perhaps if you had started at the higher dollar amount, you would actually be almost able to fund yourself $2 million road budget, and even almost able to in the $4 million road budget, plus all your other capital, which includes your ambulance replacements, your snowplow replacements, your fire truck replacements, your rooftops, your pavement, it's everything. So that was just very insightful for me, and I wanted to share.
Can you go back to the capital plan ratio for fire trucks? And maybe this was just a oversight, or maybe I'm reading it wrong. But those 3 fire trucks, you show 2 of them being replaced, but the middle one isn't being replaced. So are we eliminating fire truck completely?
Yes. That's correct. You don't need all 3, you need 2.
They bought the 3 because we combined all the fire departments at one time, but instead of making it look like they were favoring one fire department over the other, I think that's how they came out with the 3. But we also sold trucks, we got rid of trucks at the same time.
Yeah, and in 1999, the Silver Lake Fire Station burned down, so they had to
They had 3 trucks.
two new trucks,
And that's 2 at the same time.
2
Because
fire
we're-
trucks.
But going forward, we do not ever want to buy 3 fire trucks at the same time ever again. You should stagger them.
We also bought 2 rescue squads. In cash for them at one time.
Same time, they figured we could save money if we bought 2 of them at the same time. You got the same thing you're just talking about.
Understood, there could be economies of scale, however, the expenditure on those is so high. And the replacement, it would make more sense to stagger them. Should never have both pieces of apparatus going bad at the same time, especially in a critical piece of infrastructure like that. You have to have your fire trucks working, you have to have an ambulance to respond to calls, you have to have it. It's just staggered.
Fire engine usually lasts you almost 20 years. These were kind of new models that they came out with, they weren't very good.
Different parks.
Cassandra, go ahead.
Oh, thank
Finish
you.
up.
Just out of curiosity, the picnic table grilling kitchen trash can replacement program is $10,000 every year. Is that for all the parks?
For all the parks. Yeah, and you will get handouts of this stuff to go home, so you don't have to analyze every line today, because you will get handouts.
I'm just curious.
You're welcome.
Just throw, it sounds like a big number, I'll just throw an insight, a picnic table, they're about $1,200.
Okay.
So it sounds like a big number, the trash cans, the metal, with like the rubberized around them, they're about $800.
You know that, thank you.
Yep.
Can you go back to the mill rate slide? So am I reading this correctly, that if we had merged at the larger number, the mill rate would have been less? than what they merged at?
We believe so. We've been trying to go back and recreate everything, and this is what we think it would have been. Christopher, did you have a chance to?
Yeah, like we're not 100% sure what the tax levy would have been, hypothetical number. So we're not, there's not a way to know exactly what the tax levy number.
So this shows a little less, but let's just say it was even.
It was the same.
Right, so that's why I'm confused why you wouldn't give yourself. You're taking two municipalities and you have two budgets, that's what it takes to operate each one. You combine. Your services are not, you're not saving $3 million, like I just don't understand.
Mill rates are funny. Mill
But
rates-
but it doesn't matter, it still costs you money to run two municipalities, you're combining now into one, but it still costs that money.
Would you rather have a surplus than a deficit?
But that was the promise to look for the village.
Right.
Of Silver Lake to take on Salem, because their taxes are going way down.
Way down.
Why is that?
Which I understand that, and so that brings me to my next slide. How do we move forward? So we know where our capital plan is and what it shows us, and again, not faulting any previous organization or group that put these numbers together on how you started. Because you only knew what you knew, right? If you didn't have a capital plan, you didn't know how much everything cost. And when I read through the historical documents, it said that they went to the expense line, not the actual bills. So they just looked at the expense line as a budget, but not the actual bills. And they didn't build a capital plan. So they never quantified the entire cost of running both of them merged as one. Just picked a number, it feels like. So how do we move forward? And so with tax levy caps, we really are limited as to how you can move forward. And I threw up a lot of ideas. I'm not married to any one of these. It's not my job to be married to any one of these. It's your job to tell me which one we're going to pursue so that we can move forward. So my recommendation though, is that the village board and the residents should embark on a strategic planning effort to determine how to best move forward. I don't think any one of you knows the right answer. You might have 7 different ideas. I have another idea. All of them have ideas. But what is the right plan? I don't know how the village wants to develop. So like if you chose economic development to realize net new construction, because that's a really easy thing. Net new construction is the only way you can raise your levy, other than a referendum or borrowing, right? What kind of economic development do you want? We talked about this a little bit last night with the EDC. I don't know what kind of development the community wants. And you might have 7 different ideas of what the community wants. So strategic planning is one way to gather, and the EDC survey is another way to gather input as to if we're going to pursue economic development for net new construction, what kind of development does that look like? And then referendum, that's a way to increase your taxes to be able to pay for your debt. Borrowing is another way. A combination of all 3 is another thing you can be looking at, or do nothing. And we're still status quo, but status quo is going to cause your infrastructure to continue to deteriorate to a point where you can no longer afford. So you can't really do nothing. Maybe you can have a pause, but I don't recommend a pause for very long. And
One
so,
other bullet point, that you could put on that list is to cut something else, and it should be talked about, because it helps put it into perspective.
Yes.
Because these are big dollars you gotta come up with for the capital plan, but it should be on there. Cut operating budget to fund capital, and at least it puts it in perspective, you need $1 million, well, do you wanna not have law enforcement or something, that's. I think, in my experience, your budget wasn't that flush here, that there was lots of money lurking around. You might disagree and people in the room might disagree, but it should be considered. And then I think, in my experience, it's a combination, I never did directly, but it's a combination of all of the things on the list.
to speak to cut something, I don't know what you would cut other than parks. Because last year we went to zero-based budgeting. We built your budget from 0. We blew the thing up and we said, how much does it cost to run public works? How much does it cost to run every single thing that you do? I don't know where you're going to find millions of dollars in savings. We've already found savings. I don't know that you're gonna find a lot more. Parks? Well, who wants to do that? So I'm not recommending it. But yes, we can definitely go back to the line items in each category and ask the question of what can you cut? I don't know what the answer would be. So in the interim, the village should consider ways to fund capital so that we don't fall farther behind, therefore compounding the future financial challenges. And that's where Ellers is going to present some scenarios for you. Before Todd comes up, are there any other questions for me before we transition to funding?
So even if we had some economic development, we are not going to realize those tax dollars for years. So that's still in the short term because of years of building up, right, is not going to help us right now.
Right, especially if you do tax increment financing districts. So TID districts defer it even longer before you can realize any income.
That's right.
So the things that bring in revenues most quickly would be businesses, like your industrial park, but only if it's not in a TID. It's one business will bring in more revenues in tax dollars than a number of houses, right? So the revenues off of a business will be.
The house costs you money in other areas.
And the houses cost you more. So that's part of the comments that we made last night to the EDC is, what do we want to look like? You can develop hundreds of acres of farmland into houses, but all those houses are going to require fire protection, law enforcement, and snow plowing, and road maintenance, right? And schools. All of those houses that have people, and all those people need services. Whereas if you do some more businesses, like your business park here, perhaps that could bring in more revenues and take up less acreage and require less services. Again, I don't know what you want to look like. The community hasn't told me. We haven't done a strategic plan. We haven't done community input. And so that's something that would be helpful to figure out. The EDC is also doing a survey to figure out what we want to look like. But these are part of the math problem that we all need to understand is a business will bring you more revenues than a single house. And businesses will take less acreages than houses, and houses take more services than businesses. Don't know what you want to look like though. Do you want to be a bedroom community? Do you want to be a mix of different kinds of things? What do you want to look like? And we showed during the EDC meeting last night a number of different graphs, pie charts from different communities that showed how different communities have, I'd be happy to share that with you, but pie graphs, right? So some communities have a really good diversification of line items of revenues that are coming in, right? You've got commercial, industrial, and residential. And it shows that in pie charts. So Pleasant Prairie, Mount Pleasant, West Bend, their pie charts were more colorful. Whereas then when you looked at Salem Lakes, ours was less colorful. It was 97% residential and the remainder being the other stuff. So what do we want our pie chart to look like? How do we want, what percent of your taxes do you want your residents to contribute to versus a business or an industry? I don't know what you want your pie charts to look like. That's something that we'll figure out as we go through strategic planning and through the EDC process.
So I do have a question. So with this presentation, correct me if I'm wrong, but we really shouldn't be considering a TID district until we're flush or till we're at zero. We're a better financial position, because that sounds to me, based on everything I've listened to today, is something that a community is in better financial shape can take on, because it's kind of like an extension of debt in its own way. But not necessarily something we'd want to do in our current position.
Could I comment on that?
Yes, please.
So just a couple of things, and this gets a little bit technical, but we talked about net new construction. So if you create a tax increment district and you have growth in that district, you still get a net new construction allowance, which will allow you to increase your levy.
Okay.
But while that TID is open, that increase in the levy is spread only across the taxpayers outside of the TID. So there is an economic benefit to growth in a TID from a levy limit perspective. However, it's correct to say you're not actually getting the benefit of the reduction in taxes and the additional dollars until it closes. The other thing I would say is you should only ever consider creating a TID on evidence of a demonstrated need. Our best practice is when a developer comes in and they say that they need TID assistance, you should go through the same sort of an underwriting process that an investor or a lender would and make sure that there's a true demonstrated gap that prevents that project from being able to be undertaken with private capital alone. So I would just add that as a matter of diligence as you think about TIDs. You only create them when you want the development and there needs to be a TID, otherwise it truly won't happen.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the kids were initially for blighted areas.
Blighted or industrial under the original TID law, but you can really accomplish almost any type of
I
development.
know you can now.
Yeah.
But if we increase more tenants in our business park, again, it would
The long-term benefit would be there. So some use of TID is not necessarily a bad thing for us because the long-term benefit would be there, but you have to weigh the cost benefit and the increased call on your services, right? So can you afford to do the TID in the short term until you can realize the long-term benefit? And that is a math problem. I'm not going to go into today.
So to follow up, can you give a couple examples of what would be qualifiers for to use a residential development community that you would say you need to, if these exist, then a TID would be appropriate?
Yeah, so I would say for the last few years, the majority in our firm probably creates 70 to 80 TIDs per year across the state. We're seeing most TIDs right now created for residential development, mostly multifamily or higher density. And part of the reason is, we've got increased construction costs, we have increased cost of capital, and you can't simply increase rents to make the project profitable because people can't afford to pay the rents. So you have to set rents at what the market can bear, but your costs are fixed with the higher interest rates, with the higher cost of construction. And what happens is when you run that through a pro forma, there's a gap where the return to the developer, the return to the equity investors is at a level where it doesn't make the project worth doing. And so where you see these TIFs created for especially multifamily development, Mount Pleasant's a great example. They probably have done 7 or 8 projects in the last several years with TIF assistance. That TIF assistance is geared to defraying some of the costs of the development such that the project is profitable for the developer.
So when you talk about underwriting, then you're taking developers' numbers to be true in authorization, or how do you?
No, we tear it apart. We go through. We have people on our staff that have a background in commercial banking, real estate development. They will go through that with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that all the assumptions are reasonable within ranges. It's difficult, to hide those things because there's databases where you can look up construction costs, rates of return on different existing projects, sales, and so there's a lot of data out there that can be used to vet that.
So before any TIF district could be moved forward in our community, for example, Bear, right? Bear, we know is interested in doing a TIF district on housing development. The one along 83 that we've talked about briefly. That would then, we would take and send their financial stuff to Ellers. Ellers would work on creating all that financial analysis for you to figure out what is that difference that needs to be covered and what would that mean. So they would do that and Bear would pay for that. So that would be something they would pay for. I haven't sent the Bear one to Ellers for a full review yet because we haven't really gotten through who we want to do that, yes or no. So next week, Tuesday, there is a special planning commission meeting where you'll get to see 3 different Bear proposals. And one of them is the 83 project. And after the planning commission hears it and hopefully the board can attend, you can then decide, is this something we really like? Is this something we want to move forward? And if we do, then we send it to Ellers and with a financial agreement with Bear pays for it, they do the analysis, and then you get the information back and decide yes or no. But you hate to have them spend money. It's about $10,000 for that analysis. So you hate to have Bear spend that money without having a little bit more complete information and feeling comfortable like you want to move forward. And I felt before we did that, going through your capital plan and understanding where you stand today would be really insightful. Understand where is the gap? How much is the gap? What are the options for moving forward? And there are a number of them. And hopefully you can give us some direction. What, are you ready to hear the next presentation?
I've got just, when you talked about the different equipment that we own, some of it is multi-use. And it's paid for by the district and by our budget. Utility district is different. And the way their revenue is, that's. And, is kind of, how much of that stuff is used there? Should they be paying 50% and the highway department the other 50% or? So the capital plan,
Yes.
and what I'm saying, capital plan for the utility district,
There is a
maybe
separate,
should stay on its own.
it does stand, yes, that one is separate. So because the utility district is an enterprise fund that was talked about during part one, all of that capital is in that plan.
So it's a stormwater,
Correct, yeah.
if we do a district with fire and rest.
That's another conversation for another day, but yeah, probably at some point you could look at the fire and rescue. There's a lot of law around that, I don't know all of it. So I don't want to get into.
Yeah, right now, our
You
mill-
probably just can't at the moment.
Right now, our mill rate is $2.91 per ton of that. I know that the fire and rescue gets a stop of 48, so it's virtually 50%. And we know we're under that there, so that should be getting more.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge too, is right now, out of your general fund, you're using $1.5 million to fund capital. That is what you have left to be able to do anything for wages. So when you know that you're having a burn and churn of your fire and rescue staff, you're going to have to tap into that 1.5 to figure out how to address wages there so that you can have more than a 1-year tenure or less. You in fact have less than a 1-year tenure of some of your paramedics because your wages here are not competitive. So that is a piece I really didn't touch on there, but that's all you have left of your general fund to work with. Everything else is already expended on other things. So, yes, I don't know what to do. Hopefully you'll tell me during budget. And we will build that for you. So, without further ado, we're going to turn this over to Ellers.
Thank you. So Cassandra's last slide had some options on there. One of those was debt. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about debt. So levy limits were already covered. I won't go through that again, other than to make the point that geo debt payments are exempt from limits. And that was very intentional in the levy limit law. So general obligation means that when you issue that debt, regardless of how you're actually raising the money to pay it, at the end of the day, you're obligated to levy the property tax or otherwise supplement that with other revenues to make sure that that payment gets made. If the legislature would have put debt under the limit, it would no longer be general obligation debt. It would be a limited obligation debt. And as a result, all municipalities, counties, everyone else in the state of Wisconsin, governmental borrowers would have to pay more for their capital because it wouldn't be seen as strong of a security. So geo debt, the only important takeaway on the slide is it is exempt. So one of the, there was a time 20+ years ago, pre-levy limits, where if you had capital projects, especially smaller ones, equipment purchase, you simply raised the levy and you funded that with cash. Levy limits has made that very difficult to do. In a lot of respects, you're kind of an outlier in the fact that you're still able to allocate about $1.5 million a year to capital. Most municipalities are at the point where they've long ago kind of used up that cushion for operating and truly are maxed out at their levy limit, and anything they want to do on the capital front, they have to borrow for. So municipalities typically do issue debt, finance capital expenditures, partly due to the levy limit exemption, but there's also a little bit of a philosophical thought process to it as well. So if you're reconstructing that road that's going to last 10, 15, or 20 years, and you're paying cash for it in the year that work is done, everyone that lives in the village is basically bearing the full cost of that project in that year. The residents, they come, they go, and people are going to enjoy the service life of that road, that building, that park improvement over the useful life. So, when it's a balancing act. We don't like to borrow, we're Wisconsinites, we're conservative, we like to cash carry. And that saves us a lot of interest expense, but on the flip side, there's practical reasons why you may need to finance. And again, a part of that may just simply be for equity. So you're spreading the cost, particularly of really large projects, out over a period of time. So just to kind of level set on where you are right now, this may answer some of the questions on your debt service fund, your debt service budget. In the far left-hand side, that is the scheduled principal and interest payments for all village general obligation debt based on what you have on the books today. So 2.877 million, for example, in 2025. So in your debt service budget, again, with no future debt, that total payment is what would be the expenditure side of that debt service fund budget. Now, I mentioned that general obligation debt is secured by a tax levy, a pledge of a tax levy. However, you have various monies that you apply so that you don't have to levy the full amount. So we've got the offsets listed from the sewer utility, the stormwater utility, and TID number 1, and then that net general fund levy, that is the amount that you need to levy on an annual basis combined with those other revenues to balance out that debt service fund. Now, back to the earlier discussion, if there was 300,000 that the village board determined was in the fund balance that was above your policy, you could apply that as an additional source and reduce the amount you levy by that 300,000. But this is what you're scheduled. Noticing you have a big drop off here in the year 2030, you've got a bit of a drop next year, and then you're kind of around $1 million, and then the tail drops way off over in this location. And just kind of give you a sense of the tax rate impact. This is based on an equalized value, so your assessed number would be a little bit different in terms of the rate, but you're going to be at about low 40s, 38, 37 cents over the next 5 years in terms of current debt. So I just kind of put together a hypothetical example to show you what the levy impact would be if you wanted to finance a capital improvement program where starting next year, you did $2 million. So you have $1.5 million currently within your budget. You could choose to use some of that for the capital, or you can start to transition that to your operating budget, which is really where the levy limits are creating the problem. And then I assume that would go up to 2.5, 3.5, and then we know projects won't go down in cost. So I'm just escalating that at 3% per year. Cassandra had mentioned the gap is, or the amount of miles you get at 2 million and 4 million. So this would kind of be a halfway point. When we had a prior discussion with staff, it was expressed again, this idea we don't want to pay a lot of interest expense. And the important thing to remember about general obligation debt, it has a maximum term of 20 years, but it doesn't have a minimum term. So what I did in the first scenario is to try to show you what it would look like if you more or less took the approach of wanting to do a cash levy. Can't do a true cash levy under levy limits because we have to convert it to a debt instrument first, and we have to pay at least some interest expense on that while it's outstanding. But this is about as close as you can get to the pre-levy limit days of funding everything with a cash levy. So if we do a 1-year note, we're going to still pay interest, but we're going to minimize that interest expense by just paying it for a year or less, because usually you would put a prepayment ability in there. So you might actually only carry it for 3 or 4 months. What happens though is that when you're only borrowing for a year, you've got to pay back that principal, obviously, in that next budget cycle. So it can be a pretty large impact depending on the amount borrow. Whereas if we borrow for a little longer period of time, we can set a principal repayment schedule to try to do some smoothing of the impact on the levy. And that's going to be the second scenario I'll show you in a moment. On the left-hand side, that's just pulling over from that prior exhibit. So again, you've got that net levy for debt service on your existing debt only. And then in the annual 1-year note, there's that 2, 2.5, 3, and then escalating at 3% per year that I mentioned. I assumed a interest rate, and again, that you would carry that interest for the entire 1-year period. And then when we add that existing levy and the amount you'd have to levy for this 1-year note, you would have a debt service levy requirement of 3,056,000 instead of 994,000, or a pretty large increase of about 1.7 million. We would, more than double the equalized rate for debt service. And then we just, carry on. Again, a couple large increases, some small increases. We get a big drop here when we have some of that existing debt fall out, and then we kind of more or less stabilize. So, the benefit is you're minimizing the interest. The disadvantage is because of the existing debt structure that you have, we really don't have much in the way of flexibility of doing some structural things so that we can achieve a more level impact. The one thing I would mention too on the 1-year note, just from a timing standpoint, so you can only exclude general obligation debt from the levy limit if the debt is in place when you set the levy. So whether it's a longer term note, whether it's a 1-year note, and if you were to choose to do something for budget year 2026, you would have to have that debt schedule in place and approved prior to setting the levy for the 2026 budget. You can only claim it on the levy limit worksheet if it's in place. You can't say, well, we're going to do this. We think this is what the payment will be, and we're going to exclude it from the levy limit. It can't be hypothetical. It's got to be an actual debt payment on the books.
So just pause for just a moment. The reason why I asked Todd specifically to look at the 1-year note scenario as well is because when you look at your long range capital plan, your expenditures, we tried to equalize that bottom dollar. When you look at the $2 million road investment plus all your other capital, it averages around a $4 million spend a year. When you look at the $4 million road investment plus other capital, it averages around a $5.5 to a $6 million spend per year. So if you don't do a 1 year and you do it over multiple years, your amount of debt will continue to compound. So I just wanted you to see different scenarios. I don't know what scenario you want again, but it's just something to think about. Thank you.
So the next scenario, all I've done here, see it on the next slide, is I've done the first 5 years where I've taken out the debt a little bit longer, but I'm still making the largest principal payment in the first year, such that at least 60% of the principal in each of the next 5 years you'd be paying off in year 1. And again, that helps to minimize that interest expense that you're paying. And then what we're assuming is after that next 5-year period, then we would go to that true 1-year cash equivalent type of a scenario. So in the middle of the exhibit, what I have are next 5 years of sort of a hypothetical debt structure. So if you look at 2025 notes, which would have to again be issued prior to your levy going into place, you would start repaying that next year. You can see a larger principal payment in 2026, and then smaller payments for the remaining 4 years. And I kind of do that for the next 3 years. And then I've got kind of a crazy structure here to include no principal payment in 2031. And again, I'm doing that to take into consideration the existing debt structure. But what I was trying to solve for is if you wanted to execute capital funding at that level, what would it look like in terms of how much of that elephant would you have to eat at each of the next 3 years? And it comes out to roughly about 900,000. So in other words, to support that level of a capital improvement plan with debt financing, you'd have to be willing over the next 3 budget years to increase the levy by, so that's 900,000, and then another 900,000 on top of that, and another 900,000 on top of that. And then we're pretty much level. And when we get to 2031, we're doing that one debt service altogether. So you could sustain this at a $3 million plus 3% escalator each year if you were willing to bite this off over the next 3 budget cycles. This is just an illustration. Many other ways to do this. I mean, what I didn't show you is what most municipalities typically do, and that would be to amortize a lot of the projects over 10 or 20 years. So trade-off is you get lower payments, but you're going to pay a lot more over the term of that debt. So if you're willing to do more than 1 year, we have the ability to be a little more creative and a little more flexible and manage the impact over here a bit better.
What kind of interest rate are you figuring this in?
I think I hit the columns there, I'm not trying to remember right off the top of my head, but right now, we are, if you were doing something shorter term like this, you're 3.25 more than likely.
And if we were to amateurize, like you said, another scenario, we'd be more like a higher.
At 20 years, you're gonna be closer to 4 right now. This just compares those two scenarios. So, the takeaway here is that change. You've got that irregular impact, a big impact in 26, a big drop in 2031. And here we have that smoothing effect because we're managing that a little bit through some structuring on the front end. So, again, this isn't necessarily the only solution you may want to implement, but I thought it would be useful to actually try to quantify what the budgetary impact would be of some of these levels of funding that you're talking about as needed to support your capital plan.
And this supports a lower amount than what I presented in your capital plan. So this would assume that I presented best case scenario capital plan where everything is replaced per industry best practices, right? This funding scenario would mean you would have to go longer between replacements on things. So you would reduce your dollar amount on here and you would have to replace things less frequently. So your schedule was based on best practices. This dollar amount assumes less replacements less frequently because you wouldn't be able to fund it on that dollar amount that he showed. So I wanted to be able to give you a range to consider. You can see a lower dollar amount impact versus maybe what your schedule would show based on, like I said, best practices.
I need to make sure I understand this. So we're borrowing money every year, but then paying it back the following year, and it's $2 million. Or this is. So the first year.
So on this, well, in that's really the first scenario.
Oh, okay.
So the scenario, you would borrow $2 million before you set the levy this year. You'd pay that $2 million back next year along with $62,000 of interest.
And then borrow another.
And then
2.5 million.
just keep repeating that. And again, the reason you're doing that is so that you can exempt it from the levy limit. That's the only reason that. That sounds silly, right? To borrow
But
money
so that
and
we
back
can get-
next year, but it's so you.
So we can get more money
from the limit.
from our residents. Or whoever. Right?
The residents pay it in their taxes.
Right.
Yeah, it would, so.
Right.
It's
Yeah, in this complete 1 year scenario, all our things being, so you're gonna have some increase in your operating budget, right? But then on top of everything else, you're gonna have to add another $1.7 million to the levy.
And then what you said is this isn't even enough to fund.
No, it's not.
So how much would we need to do?
So in 2026, if you went with a $2 million road budget and you used all the 1.5 million that you're already using for capital and you didn't use it for any operations, you're still $2.7 million short. So in 2026, you would need $4.2 million on a 2-mile road program with the other capital, 4.2 million. And if you did a 4-mile road program, you would need 6.2 million. Minus the 1.5 or whatever you decide you want to still pull from general fund, right? So that's where you're short. Every year you're short. This isn't how much you're short. This is still short of what you're short.
Right.
So. And again, that's just based on industry best practices, on what a replacement schedule would look like, and in many pieces of equipment, you're already behind. But it's for you to decide when we get through budgeting this year, what is the investment you'd like to make? What is the replacement cycle you'd like us to?
Why it was wrong.
Look at the DOT schedule I gave you. Is this where you'd like us to be? It's best practices, but that doesn't mean that's what we have to do. Everything is subject to change and negotiation.
Oh, like I saw on the handout, it had like wheel loaders
Right.
at like a 10-year. Which wouldn't really be applicable to us for our usage. But then when you had on the screen up here, like 25-year was written behind it. So do you have that a little different from the handout then?
Some of them are, we've adjusted some of our stuff to be, where we keep it a lot longer than the state DOT schedule, so we've already made some of those adjustments. The DOT schedule is best practices that they recommend. We put in here what we really think we need, which is usually a longer time that we're keeping something than the DOT schedule.
They use it a lot more. Yeah.
Correct.
Every day it's up and running.
Yep.
And we can't go back more than about $2 million plus interest a year.
You can, it
Right,
all
right,
comes
right.
down to how much you're willing to increase. Excellent.
A government never makes a profit, so you only levy
So
what you're.
when we said the 24 budget,
And so I don't think
know,
you
when
could pay things off
Ford was
faster than what you.
I remember we made cuts
Your levy is.
last year. We didn't make a lot of change because we still not sure.
So the current $2.91 per thousand dollars, like, we're going a little bit, but then you'd be adding anywhere from 60 cents to a
Well,
dollar.
that's embedded in your current rate, so you'd be adding like 36 cents all.
In fact, that if they
And
would have
that's based
started,
on our.
larger budget, mill rate would have been less.
Yeah, and I
still
assume
not
it's gonna
understand.
kind of, I think I use 50% of your
Wouldn't do that.
historical average, so.
That's an easier way to explain it to people.
But if we had the longer.
$3 million bonus.
If we had that up at the Elizabeth. Sometimes it is a penance.
So if you're issuing longer term debt, you normally don't have repayment privileges, roughly like the first half. So like on a 10-year issue, this would even be a little longer, a 10-year issue, typically you're 7 years, on a 20-year issue, around so many contract. And that's if you obtain the capital to the bond market.
Two budget.
Other
Two communities,
raising
right.
capital, commercial bank.
Why wouldn't you just take
We did
one,
it
submit it in your
a
budget?
couple of years ago, we're at 2%. That's what. He's actually, he's the roads.
Yeah.
In the example earlier, the $4 million that we.
$3 million. That's not like chump change.
bonded.
So I think that was your last slide, correct? What other questions do you guys have that maybe between Dave, myself and Todd, we can answer? Did capital planning make sense?
Yeah.
Are there any questions on that? Okay. Borrowing, understand that. I guess our next step would be then, I will hand out all of the documents today, so you can sit down and go through every single thing that we fund and ask additional, more detailed questions later. I didn't want to hand them out during the presentation because I really wanted to keep focused and not lost in the numbers, right? So, and now you'll get the numbers. You can sit down and go through them, understand them, compare them to the Wisconsin DOT replacement schedule. Feel free to ask us to come and look at the equipment. You kind of already got to see some of it already when we did the capital tour. But that doesn't mean you saw everything. So if there were things you didn't see that you find in the capital plan that you'd like to see, give us a call. We're happy to take you out and show you whatever piece of equipment, whatever facility, parking lot, rooftop, whatever it is that you're interested in seeing, we'll show you. The easiest way for us to teach you about what we do is to show it to you. So. Questions?
Comment, which is, it's all about sustainability, or that was my big thing. Sustainability is the ability to produce a budget year after year, right? Without shocking the taxpayers or having to go to referendum every year. And so I'd always get upset. And I know everybody's got their own challenges every year in the government, but when my school district comes every other year now and says, well, we need a referendum to maintain the building. And I'm like, what did you do with the money that we gave you, right? And I thought that was to do the programming and the buildings, and they've separated those two, and you see what happens with that, right? Not a good situation. I think two things going on here. I mean, you got some tough budget figures to figure out. A lot of communities do, and we work with them. So you got some tough numbers. You'll figure that out. But the one thing I hope I leave here today, have a CIP, have a capital improvement plan. Even if you can only fund it with $1 and you're hopelessly underwater, have one. Because that is your key to working yourself out of this, and you will, but, when, only if you have that hard covenant. And so it's great to see everybody, but.
Yeah, the entire capital plan it's flexible. It's really up to you to tell us, how much do you want to fund? When you give us a number that you want us to work towards, then we adjust the entire thing. We gave you 2 scenarios today. Those are just 2 scenarios in the sea of many. You can give us different scenarios you'd like us to look at, but we had to give you somewhere to start. And so that's what you have. And anytime you have questions, feel free to call us. And we look forward to additional budget workshops going forward. We started it earlier this year because as I mentioned when I started this presentation, it's been a labor of love, right? From when Dave was here trying to build the budget from more of a checkbook, money in, money out, balancing exercise, to then taking it from your line item, 14 pages, to a category based, to trying to understand how much each line of business costs to run here, to now adding in your capital plan. It's been almost 2 full years in the making to get you to this. It's not going to change overnight. I'm not asking you to change it overnight, but we at least now have a roadmap for the future. And hopefully that will help you to make decisions, to give us direction as staff to what we'd like to see next.
Presented line.
I don't have anything else. Thank you for your time.
I just want to say thank you for the level of information you shared today. And I would hope that we could put some of this on the website, because I think it's very telling, especially the one slide where you showed a $250,000 house. The level of taxes that actually go to the village is, what was it, $741. $741. And the rest of it is out of our control.
Correct.
And I also want to thank everyone, including staff, because I do know you guys have spent months and months on this to go back and try to figure out the why. And then unfortunately puts this board in a really bad position to make some tough decisions. And I wish that I wish it would have been done differently back in 2017. But I think we have a lot to think about, and it's unfortunate, and we're going to be put in a hard spot with a lot of questions from residents that we'll have to work through, but.
I'm with you, Rita. I think that pie chart that shows that, and on top of that, a $250,000 house, like that's on the lower end of the spectrum for a community. Yeah, you couldn't, good luck finding one.
But I think when you look at your $4,000 tax bill and you see that,
Yeah.
$741 goes to the village, right?
I think from the board review, the average is like 333,000.
Right, but it's just, we get a small portion, the schools, the library, and that's out of our controls.
And that
My
percentage would
kind
be
of
the
point.
same, so it's 18%, so you can pull any tax bill and figure out.
Sure.
Regardless of the number of the tax bill, right, you can figure out how much of it comes to us, and it's always gonna be about 18%. It's not a lot. compared to Where all the rest of it's going.
I agree, it would be helpful for residents and in the community to understand that, because I had no clue. I learned an incredible amount today. I'm a little.
And I still question why, if you take 2 communities with 2 budgets, when you merge, why wouldn't you just take those budgets and merge it and that's your number? Why would you fund it $3 million less?
And $1 million less than the town of Salem on its own.
I
I
don't,
go to admit, I was not there.
well, thank you, Dennis, but I don't understand that, because it just,
That's a selling.
so now it's compounded and compounded and compounded
In some.
to today. And I remember this, Dave, and I asked Cassandra to give you a call, because when you came on, that was this time of year, and your job was the budget. And I remember every single time I talked to you, you kept telling me, Rita, this is really difficult to understand. This is really difficult to understand. We're really trying hard. And I remember that, and you did a lot to,
Motto. What was his motto?
I don't remember.
Dollar in, dollar out.
All I remember is that was an almost daily conversation with you. And you did a good job of trying to get it so that, you know, it was more understandable for us. And I know that those of us who were here during that time appreciated that. And I think even the existing board members did, because they hadn't seen some of that information before. And then that just has kind of evolved now to where we are. This year, you know, we had a much more transparent budget, which a lot of people found fault with. That was always in there, they just couldn't see it. And so now we're just trying to be more transparent. But this is just really unfortunate that we have to make these decisions, and it's not gonna be easy. And without, you know, even if we do find development, we don't realize that money for a while, so.
But the only thing we can do at this stage is to tell the story. And that's it.
In the slides I can put online so the public can see them.
I think
also
that is
created,
a good thing.
I also created the narrative, which is just a summary of the slides, so I can put that online too. So if someone doesn't want to click through the slides, they can just read the 4-page narrative. But it really tells the story. It was a lot of work to gather it all, but thank God some of the FAQs and presentations from 2016 and 17 are still online. I was able to pull a lot from those. But we are where we are now, and I know I'm looking forward to your direction, and so is staff, as to how you want to move forward. As you heard from Todd, it does take a bit of time to be able to pull a bond or a loan. And so if we do want to take debt for any of our capital expenses going forward, we will need to know probably 2 months early, 2 months prior to setting your levy.
So when is that?
Todd, what is the
Like
date?
September?
No,
When you set the levy, it's early November.
early November.
Yeah, so by the end of
For
August, you would
sure.
need to know.
So we would probably want to do another budget workshop, or one of these committee of the whole meetings where you could give direction to staff as to, if you would like to take out debt, what is the amount that you would like to take out, so that I can give that direction via you to Todd, and he can begin working on that. Because it has to be taken before we issue the levy. And we'll need to know that as well, so we know how to build the budget. So Chris is already working on building the budget with staff. And we're building the operating side of it right now. The capital, it all plays in. So of your general fund dollars, how much of it is going to go to capital in the future versus what's going there now? We'll need to know that, as well as how much do we want to take out of debt.
And we can do other things. We can start charging for water, with, you know.
There are things that you can't be doing, correct? To charge for water, you have to go through the Public Service Commission to do so. And they'll help you to.
So that'll be part of budget talks.
That's something that takes a lot of effort. We're already talking to them about how we can. Is currently give away your water. I don't know what you want to do. So we're in the early stages of how, if you want to, how do you do it? What are the steps that we have to go through? So we'll have that information for you.
Okay. Well, I would like to see this presentation be put on the homepage. You know, along with maybe a link to this meeting
Okay,
with it on the homepage.
we'll add this to the homepage for the public to be able to access, as well as the recording.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have any other questions? Right now? Yeah, I think so. Concluding thoughts, wrap up regarding capital plan and budget? Yeah.
Give us a spreadsheet.
Yes, I have.
Okay, and you've got, now, if there's a piece of equipment that is both the utility and the highway department, for example, so you've got it broken down, so 60% belongs here, 40% belongs there.
I don't know that I have exactly what you're looking for, but I.
Well, we use dump trucks or some of the dump trucks.
Yes, I don't know that I can see that answer right on the spot.
What I'm driving at,
Correct.
that's Revenue Street.
Yes. Okay, we'll have to still be quiet because they have not concluded the meeting. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, any thoughts on other scenarios that you would like staff to look at? you can always email if you have any other suggestions.
It's just a lot for us.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things we talked about in the past meeting where we were gonna vote on the wheel loader was trying to come up with a public works committee. That aside, I mean, there's some direction there that possibly we can find used piece of equipment at less cost than new, and the hours that we put on, for example, that large payloader is 200 hours a year. And so it's not like a daily.
Yeah, I think those are part of we will have to do that as part of the budget talks for sure.
So I guess we see, looking for staff to look at, that would be,
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
And then I remember, like the snowplow that goes with that, I think it costs about 41,000. But there might be a way to get that at more like 21,000, through a different supplier, municipal supply. So I guess direction to try and, ferret those out.
Our capital schedule, what we've tried to do is assume that you purchased new equipment because then it extends the longevity. So you will notice, I think on the loader, for example, we put it in at a 25-year replacement because we assumed you purchased new, so it would last long. So we did try to account for that. So while the state DOT maybe said that was a 10-year replacement, we more than doubled that, but everything assumed by new. And that's how we were able to extend it. So again, we're flexible, of course, on how we purchase things, but that is how some of those numbers came be.
Sure.
Is that the longevity is based on if you purchased it new today, it will last longer than if you bought it used today.
Right, and
It
then,
also costs twice as much and some.
yeah,
In the example of the loader with the state DOT replacement schedule, it was a 10-year and we more than doubled that. So you're still getting longevity, a lot of longevity.
okay. All right, so you have the spreadsheets for us for the
Yes.
capital plan.
So if we do nothing, we just will end up not being able to do.
Everything like the streets,
Just
I mean, we get a lot of road complaints now. Yeah, worse than they are. Yeah,
That's all we're doing. And
Right.
per what I showed you is you should be doing 4.3 per year. Because you have 86 miles and the average duration of a road is 20 years. And as you heard in the previous capital presentation, some roads last longer, some roads do not. It depends on what you're under, the
base.
base is, correct.
And
So-
based on amount of use.
and tree coverage.
Tree coverage, amount of use,
Trucks.
all of that plays in, right? So 20 is just an average. And like I said, some last longer, some don't. So 4.3 is where you should be if you were going to get to a regular replacement schedule, so that we could get deteriorated below 5.
hey Cassandra,
6 or higher.
how many miles are in the boundary agreement area? Like, did you take that into consideration with all of
It's
this?
not a lot. There's
Okay,
I think there's 2 miles of road in the boundary area.
Okay.
There's one
Very, very
road on this east side and then
Mostly agricultural land.
just by,
I think one thing that might be great, we touched on it, at the roads presentation, was, when we do these road replacements, like the one present discussion, there's a section of road that the base was questionable, we're putting brand new road over it, and that was in the last few weeks. If you go down North Avenue, and you'll see where Antioch's doing some roads and they have rolls of geomatting there ready to put down before pavement goes down. And currently, we don't have any use of reflective prevention in geofabric or geomatting and below, which would give us additional bridging and make the expense that we put down the material last longer. So really looking into that and seeing, yeah, I know those do add expenses per square yard.
Yes.
But and see how that lays out, and is that a smart move to incorporate some of those items?
The map that you gave during capital plan part 1 presentation, and I know the engineer is looking at that. So it will increase the cost of your roadways. So if you increase the cost per mile, you'll get less miles at the same dollar amount, right? So that may be okay. That may be the investment strategy we'd like to choose because it will extend the duration. So he is looking at that.
And I noticed we're doing a lot of subdivisions, so they weren't put in correctly evidently.
mm-hmm.
Some of these newer subdivisions where we have to redo the roads.
Yeah, they may not have had enough base, or maybe the pavement wasn't laid down as thick as it should have been. There could be any number of variables as to why some subdivision roads don't last as long as others.
I'd just like to comment on something that Rita said earlier about the small portion of tax that we get. I recall that, depending upon what school district you're in right now, it's like $13.50 is the average
Mhm.
gross tax.
Right,
Of that, we get $2.91.
right.
So
And
county, GTE, Walnut High School or
No.
Central High School.
I don't think a lot of residents understand, we don't set those, so we don't have anything.
Be everything.
Well, right, but I'm just saying, I don't think residents and a lot of them quite understand that their $4,000 tax bill does not all come to us. Like, we don't control the library, we don't control the schools, like,
But we're
know.
intake for the money.
correct.
And whoever gets that, gets the headaches.
Yeah,
So it doesn't sound like 2 million is enough, but that's gonna increase the taxes by 0.6% based on what was up there, and then over 1%.
60 cents.
60 cents.
60 cents.
That was the mill rate.
All right, I'm gonna have to research that.
So we can give you more information on that too. I can share Todd's presentation so you can study it. Thank you. There's a lot of information in it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
okay. Well, I think, thank you for all of that information. There was a lot of work put into that. So if there's no other questions, I will make a motion to adjourn. Okay, all in favor?